I know many people believe that with age comes endurance, that growing old means learning to live quietly, even invisibly. But no one tells you how it begins. It doesn't arrive overnight. It seeps in through a careless word, a passing glance, or a door that closes while you're still standing there, waiting to be seen. My name is Lori Bennett. I'm 65 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm not bitter or difficult. I'm simply a mother who gave everything to her son, and now, after nearly 70 years of life, I'm learning to love myself again. That Sunday morning was clear and bright. The sky looked almost painted. I had just watered the rose bushes on my back porch. My quiet corner of the wooden house that Robert, my late husband, and I built more than 30 years ago. I sat down on a wrought iron chair, took a sip of cold tea, and listened to a soft jazz tune on the radio. The house was so still, I could almost believe I truly lived alone. Then the living room door burst open. My son, Eric, 32, walked in as if the place belonged entirely to him. "No, may I?" "No. Hi, Mom." "Mom, you should go out for a bit today," he said, without looking up from his phone. "Go grab coffee with the neighbor. I'm having a barbecue with some friends here." That was it, short, cold, final. As if I were a guest in my own home. I just looked at him in silence. He turned away, sliding his slippers across the hardwood floor, laughing at something on his screen. I stayed seated, cup in hand, music still playing, but something inside me went quiet. The music turned to noise. The tea lost its flavor, and the blue sky outside suddenly meant nothing. I sat frozen for a few minutes, wondering if I'd misheard. But no, it wasn't the first time. It just hurt more this time. I walked through the house, the rug crooked, the TV remote on the floor, the table covered in crumbs, his shoes in the hallway, a damp towel draped over a chair. Like always, I started to tidy up, but not today. I went to the hallway cabinet and took out an old wooden box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were folders, bills, and papers, the things I kept, just in case. I pulled out a blue file, the same one I'd used when I helped Eric move in after his messy divorce. 7 years. 7 years since he'd shown up at my door, holding 2 suitcases and saying, "Just for a while, Mom." And I believed him, because that's what mothers do. We believe. At first, he tried to help a little. Then he stopped. He said times were tough, and I didn't want to pressure him. So I stayed quiet. I paid for groceries, water, electricity, internet, even his gas. I saw the new headphones, the fancy hoodie, the latest phone. But I never once heard, "Mom, here's my part of the rent." 7 years, not one bill paid. When he told me to go out for a bit that day, it wasn't just disrespect. It was a declaration. "You're not welcome here anymore." This house was the last thing Robert and I had built together. Before he passed, he told me, "Don't let him depend on you too much, Lori. He'll never grow up." Now I understood he'd been right. I could have yelled, argued, slammed doors, but I didn't. I chose another way. I went upstairs and looked at our wedding photo on the wooden dresser. On days like that, I missed Robert deeply. If he were still alive, things might be different. But now it was just me trying to hold on to the house, to my son, and to the last pieces of myself. I went to the kitchen, opened a drawer, took out pen and paper, and wrote a note. "Hope you enjoy the party. Starting tomorrow, the bills are yours. The homeowner, your mother, is taking an indefinite vacation." I left the note on the table, gathered my documents, made copies, and organized them not for him, but for myself, as proof that I had Ponix done my part. That night, I didn't go out for a walk, as he suggested. I went to stay with my longtime friend Diane. I only brought a pillow, my folder of papers, and my self-respect. And I slept deeply, peacefully, for the first time in years. Because when someone leaves, it's not always to run away. Sometimes, it's to find themselves again. We don't notice when sacrifice turns into habit, when just for today becomes every day, when it's fine becomes a rule. And by the time we realize it, we're living with a stranger, and worse, that stranger is our own child. I still remember that rainy March day when Eric showed up at my door, suitcase in hand, his face pale and hollow. He had just gone through a divorce, his hair a mess, dark circles under his eyes. I didn't ask anything. I simply opened the door. Just for a while, Mom, I promise. I made chicken soup, cleaned the living room, and folded fresh towels to leave on the bed, just like any American mother would do for her child. The next week, he slept all day, saying he was mentally exhausted. I believed him. I cared for him quietly, moving softly, speaking gently, waiting for him to recover. A month passed, then two. He never looked for a job. He barely stepped outside. He'd say, "I'm not ready yet." And me, I always respected that. I bought more groceries, milk, meat. The gas ran out faster, the electric bill went up, and I kept covering it all, as if it were natural. He used to say, "Once I get back on my feet, I'll pay you back, Mom." But he never did. By the third month, he brought home a new gaming console. He set it up right in the middle of the living room, cords everywhere, controllers tossed around. He played until 2 a.m., shouting into his headset, laughing loudly with his friends. Whenever I asked him to lower his voice, he'd mock me. "Oh, come on, Mom, relax. Or are you going to sleep? With your hearing aid on again?" My heart ached, but I stayed silent, because that's what I'd done for years. Staying quiet to keep the peace, not realizing that silence had slowly erased my life. The guest room had become entirely his space. His clothes were everywhere from the hallway to the couch. A damp towel always hung over the kitchen chair. The bathroom looked like a battlefield, razor stubble all over the sink, empty shampoo bottles on the tile floor. I handled everything in the house: shopping, cooking, laundry, and if I forgot something, he'd snap at me with frustration. "We're out of milk again, Mom." He never said thank you, never asked if I was tired. All he knew was how to demand. I tried to talk calmly, to reason with him, to explain that he needed to find a job, to help pay for the household expenses. But his answer was always the same. "I am looking, Mom. But when you pressure me like this, I can't focus." Once, I decided to talk seriously. It was our second Christmas since he'd moved back in. All I wanted was a simple dinner, just the two of us. I cooked roast chicken, mashed potatoes, even baked a pumpkin pie the way Robert used to love. But that evening, Eric never came home. He stumbled in around 2 a.m., drunk, mumbling. I forgot it was the 24th. I sat alone at the table, staring at the cold roast chicken and untouched rice pudding. I ate by myself. I cried in silence. And the next morning, I brewed coffee, as if nothing had happened. One of the most humiliating moments of my life was when I had to sell my gold bracelet, the one Robert had given me for my 40th birthday. I needed money to fix the refrigerator Eric had tried to repair to save a few bucks. He promised he knew what he was doing, but only made it worse. I sold the bracelet to my neighbor, Mary, on a 3-part payment plan. I never told Eric, because it was too shameful to admit, that I was selling pieces of my own memories just to keep the house running, the house he treated like a motel. My sister, Margaret, noticed the exhaustion in my eyes every time she visited. Once, she stopped by the door, held my hand, and whispered, "You've disappeared, Lori. You're not living anymore. You're just existing." And she was right. I didn't laugh anymore. My world had shrunk to the kitchen, the laundry room, and the old sofa. I no longer read books or knitted scarves like before. The radio in the kitchen, once the heartbeat of the house, had been silent for nearly a year. One night, I dreamed of Robert. He stood in the middle of the living room and asked, "Why is the house so dark, Lori?" And I couldn't answer. The house was dark because I had turned off the light within myself. All in the name of love, or rather, what I still wanted to believe was love. When his friends came over, I became invisible. If I tried to make conversation, he'd change the subject right away. Once, I heard him tell a friend, "My mom's a bit paranoid, don't mind her." That sentence cut through me like a knife. That sentence tore my heart apart. I was the one who cleaned the scrape on his knee when he fell off his bike at 6 years old. I was the one who lied to my boss to leave work early and pick him up when he had a fever at school. I was the one who kept his messy little drawing on the fridge for 5 whole years. And now, in his eyes, I was nothing more than a nuisance, paranoid and annoying. 7 years. 7 years of being present, but invisible. He was there physically, but emotionally, I was utterly alone, unseen, ignored like a broken light switch. Still there, but of no use to anyone. And still, I waited. Waited for an Nkaya apology. Waited for a hug, a small gesture, anything to remind me I was still seen. But there was nothing. Until that Sunday, the day he looked straight at me, pointed at the door, and said, "Go take a walk, Mom." That wasn't the worst day of my life. It was the clearest one, as if someone turned on the light, and suddenly I saw everything. The dirty corners, the cracks, the dust built up over the years. I saw it all, and I understood. I would no longer erase myself for anyone, not even my own son. What hurt most that day wasn't his words, but the certainty that he had thought them long before he ever said them. It wasn't a question. It was an order. He walked through the house like he owned it, passing me without so much as a glance, as if I were just a doorman. He went straight to his room, grabbed his phone, and started calling his friends. "Bring the electric grill, okay? Don't forget the lighter in case we run out. Oh, and invite Carol, she said she'd come." He laughed, and I just stood there in silence. While he talked, I went into the kitchen. The sink was full of dishes from the night before, an empty ice cream tub, a pot of dried noodles, 3 greasy glasses. I washed them one by one, not rushing, but inside. The anger simmered. Not anger at him, but at myself, because I knew exactly where this was going. This wasn't his first party. It was just the first time he'd been shameless enough to tell me to leave my own house so the party could be more fun. The first time he'd said out loud that my presence made him uncomfortable. When I finished washing the dishes, I wiped my hands and stood still. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting a golden line across the kitchen wall. I remembered the day Robert and I chose those tiles. He wanted beige, I wanted white. I won. He laughed and called me stubborn. I told him I was determined. Now there was no one left to argue with me, just me, and this time I would decide for myself. He came back into the living room, holding a bag of charcoal. "Hey, Mom, do we have any vinegar? I need it for the meat." He spoke like a boss, giving orders, like I was the help. I didn't answer. I opened the cabinet, set the vinegar on the counter, and went straight upstairs. I closed my bedroom door, sat on the bed, and took a deep breath. The fan hummed softly, filling the silence. I thought about everything I had sacrificed, not just for him, but for the illusion of peace in this house. For all the times I didn't invite friends over, afraid he'd be irritated. For the sleepless nights waiting for him to come home drunk. For the holidays I spent cooking and waiting while he never showed up. They were acts of self-erasure. I opened my bedside drawer. I took out my ID, my marriage certificate with Robert, and the house documents, the deed, utility bills, everything all in my name. Lori Bennett. At that moment, an idea came to me. If Eric wanted this house so badly, then he would learn the true weight of keeping it. I stood up, grabbed a clear folder, and started gathering every single document. Electricity, water, gas, property tax, groceries. Month after month, the papers stacked like a mountain. I carried the whole folder to the living room and placed it on the table. Not as a threat, but as a reminder. This house has an owner, and the owner is the one who keeps it running, not the one who just fires up the grill and throws parties. Then I went back to my room and changed into neat clothes, black pants, a light linen blouse, small silver earrings, and my favorite flat shoes. I picked up my purse and phone, then wrote a note. The party is yours, but so is the responsibility. This house still belongs to your mother. I placed the note neatly on top of the folder. From the backyard came music and laughter. The speakers were blasting that kind of soulless electronic music that didn't belong in a small suburban house in Portland, only in the lives of people who'd never had to pay an electric bill. I walked down the hallway. He didn't even notice I was fully dressed. His eyes were still glued to his phone as he laughed and shouted to someone on speaker, "Yeah, bring more beer. And don't forget the charcoal we ran out early last time." As I stepped out the front door, I felt something strange. Not exactly sadness, but a mix of relief and shame. Relief, because I had finally made the decision to leave. Shame, because I had let it get this far. I walked to the bus stop 6 blocks away. The sun was still strong, but the wind carried the faint smell of smoke and grilled meat from my backyard. I didn't look back. I took the bus to Diane's house, my best friend since our banking days. She opened the door, surprised but warm. "Oh my God, Lori, what happened? I need to stay for a few days, if that guest room's still free." "Of course. Your blanket's still folded in the drawer. Come in. I'll make some coffee." I sat at her kitchen table, my body suddenly feeling weightless. Diane brewed the coffee without asking too many questions. As the aroma filled the air, I told her everything: the party, the years before it, the note I'd left behind. She put a hand on my shoulder. "You should have done this a long time ago, Lori. But better late than never." I took a sip of black coffee, no sugar. The bitterness spread across my tongue. And I thought, maybe that's how healing begins. You have to swallow the bitterness first before you can taste anything sweet again. That night, Diane handed me a blanket and wished me good night. The mattress was a little firm, the window rattled, but I slept soundly. No video game noises, no slamming doors, no waiting for keys to turn in the lock at midnight. I slept like someone finally allowed to rest after 7 long years. The next morning, I woke to a missed call from Eric. I didn't call back. By mid-morning, 2 text messages appeared. "Mom, what's with the papers on the table?" I didn't reply. For the first time, I had something more precious than his peace, my own. On Monday morning, I woke up earlier than sunrise. The unfamiliar ceiling in Diane's house looked like a blank whiteboard. And there, I began to reorganize everything. Not just my life, but the way I understood motherhood. I used to believe being a mother meant enduring everything, never giving up, waiting unconditionally. And I had waited 7 years. Now, I would wait for myself. I showered, got dressed, and walked to a nearby bakery. I ordered a slice of toast, a strong cup of coffee, grabbed a napkin, and began to write not a confession, but a plan. Gather all the documents in my name. Call Tina, my niece, a lawyer. Check the house ownership certificate. File a notice to end the temporary stay, legal, proper, no arguments. Not revenge clarity. I folded the note and tucked it into my bra like keeping a secret close to my heart. Then I called Tina before noon. "Hi, Aunt Lori. What's going on?" "It's okay now, sweetheart." I told her everything, the years of living together, his dependency, and that final sentence. I spoke calmly, as if it were someone else's story. Tina listened without interrupting. "The house is only in your name, right?" "Yes. Ever since Uncle Robert passed." "Then it's simple. We send an official notice to end his stay with a clear legal deadline. No need for arguments." Quietly, but not silently anymore. Tina explained which documents I'd need. I already had most of them. Bills, a copy of the deed, tax papers. Just a few things were still at the house. That afternoon, Diane came with me. Around 2 p.m. We arrived. The house was empty, the door locked. Maybe Eric had gone to work or somewhere else. I unlocked the door with my own key. Inside, the air smelled of cigarette smoke, burnt grease, and spilled beer. The fan was still spinning. The windows shut tight. The sink piled high with dirty dishes. The kitchen floor sticky. I stood there, looking around. No tears, no anger. I went upstairs to my bedroom. Everything was exactly as I had left it. Curtains open. Bed neatly made. Pillows in place. I gathered my original folder. A small bag of clothes, my medicine, and my spare glasses. Then I quietly went back downstairs. Diane had opened the windows and turned off the fan for me. "Need me to do anything else?" she asked. "No, I'm just here to pick up my things. The rest he can handle himself." Before leaving, I placed an envelope on the table. Inside was the official notice that my niece Tina, the lawyer, had drafted. Everything was written politely, clearly, with a set deadline. He would have 60 days to get his life in order. This wasn't an eviction, it was the end of a favor. I locked the door and held the key in my hand. Diane walked beside me and said softly, "You did the right thing, Lori. No shouting, no hatred, just dignity." For the first time, I truly felt it. The world was still moving outside that house, and I was no longer just a wall or a decoration. I was a person, a woman still strong, clear-minded, and worthy of living. The following week, I went with Tina to the notary office. We finished all the paperwork, updating ownership, transferring utility bills. I asked to cancel the electric service and cut the internet altogether. The clerk asked, "But what if he doesn't have internet then?" I replied, calm but firm. "Then he can call the company himself and put it under his own name." That was when I finally realized the burden I had carried all those years wasn't the bills, but the chain of guilt and silence. On the way home, I stopped by a small store and bought Diane a new set of glass cups, a small gift, but full of gratitude. She greeted me with a warm smile and a tight hug. "You've changed, Lori. Your skin even looks brighter." I laughed. When your soul can breathe, your body follows. That Saturday afternoon, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter, not to anyone, but to myself. "Lori, you've survived it all: widowhood, loneliness, nights filled with fear. But what made you weakest wasn't loss. It was being treated as invisible in your own home. Now you understand. Presence without respect is just noise. And love that weighs you down isn't love. It's a debt." I folded the letter and tucked it inside Robert's old Bible. A few days later, I heard from a neighbor that Eric was angry, telling people his mother had gone crazy, left for no reason, made a scene. I didn't care. Those who feel the need to justify themselves are usually the ones lying. I had truth, paperwork, and a clean conscience. I kept moving forward. I rented a small apartment near downtown Portland, simple but bright, with a balcony and a tiny kitchen. I brought my books, photos, and a few plants. Diane helped me tidy up and hung light green curtains by the window, the kind that let sunlight in without being harsh. That first night, I sat on the balcony floor, eating rice and eggs while watching the streetlights. The city's noise sounded different, no shouting, no doors slamming, just a healing kind of quiet. I smiled softly, holding the still warm pot in my hands, and thought, I'll never return to a place where I'm treated like leftovers. Motherhood taught me many things, but learning how to be a woman on my own at 65 is what truly saved me. It felt strange, waking up in a place where no one was waiting to ask, "Where's the bread?" Or, "Why's the bathroom floor wet?" There was only the neighbor's radio and the morning chirp of sparrows. The apartment sat at the end of a peaceful street, behind a low wooden fence, with friendly neighbors always greeting me with a cheerful, "Good morning." Sunlight in the mornings, soft shade in the afternoons. Even though the walls still smelled of fresh paint, the place carried the scent of beginnings. I bought a new drying rack, a welcome mat, and reused the old cabinet Diane had given me. Little by little, I built a space of my own, like someone quietly replanting the garden of her life, one branch at a time. On Tuesday night, I cooked a simple meal: rice, carrots, and fried eggs with olive oil. But for the first time in years, I cooked for myself unrushed, unbothered. I sat on the balcony, eating under the glow of the streetlights, listening to the neighbor's TV through the wall. No shouting, no demands. The next morning, Tina called. "Aunt Lori." He got the notice. He called the office, tried to deny everything, said he couldn't believe you'd actually do it. But the papers are perfectly legal, airtight. He only asked for more time to process it. I laughed, not mockingly, but because I finally understood something. A grown man who's never faced limits before he mistakes kindness for obligation and silence for consent. He didn't see this coming, but he'll learn. Tina continued. His lawyer wants to negotiate directly with you. I refused. Not because I wanted to avoid him, but because he'd had 7 years to talk, and he never used a single one of them. I spent the next few days taking care of paperwork, updating my pension, address, registering a landline, setting up separate utility accounts, all things Eric had never done for himself once in his life. By the third Saturday after leaving, I went grocery shopping alone. I bought fruit, vegetables, and bread, and smiled at the cashier. A young woman at the produce stand handed me a small basil plant. "Take it for good luck." I brought it home, holding it like a medal, the first symbol of freedom I'd ever owned. That afternoon, there were 3 knocks at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, it was Eric, wrinkled t-shirt, creased pants, hollow eyes from lack of sleep. "Mom, you live here now?" I didn't answer right away. I motioned for him to keep his voice down. I didn't want the neighbors to hear. Then I calmly said, "I live where I'm respected. And right now, that's here." He took a deep breath, crossed his arms, and glanced around the small apartment, as if trying to figure out whether I was angry or not. "You left without saying anything. Leaving those papers like that?" It was heavy. I looked him straight in the eye. Heavy is raising a man who can't show care, not even with a simple question. "If you want to talk, call Tina. She's my lawyer. I have nothing left to explain." He tried to step inside, but I blocked the doorway. "You really want to do this? Kick your own son out?" "No. I'm giving you back the life of an adult, something you should have been carrying on your own a long time ago." He shook his head, exhaled hard, and muttered under his breath, "You don't even seem like my mom anymore." I replied, calm and steady, "No, I'm still your mother. You're just seeing me clearly for the first time." I closed the door firmly, but without anger. When I sat down, my heart was beating fast, not from fear, but from freedom, the feeling of standing up, of speaking out, of Reclaiming control, it was pure relief. In the days that followed, he didn't come back. Only 2 short messages appeared. Mom, I miss your garlic rice. The house feels empty. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, but because I knew absence can't be fixed with fake longing. If he truly missed me, he would have valued me while I was still there. Tina told me Eric hadn't made any legal moves yet. Aunt Lori, I think he's in shock. He probably still doesn't understand what's happening. I answered calmly. He doesn't need a comforting hug, he needs a mirror. I spent my quiet days organizing my recipe notebook, gluing old photos, painting picture frames in gold, and visiting the library nearby to borrow a book about houseplants. I read it every night before bed. The house I left behind was never abandoned. I simply returned it to the one who always wanted to claim it. Now it's his turn to learn how to maintain a home, how to live like an adult. Legally, I'm still the owner, but spiritually, I've moved out. And that means more than any title deed ever could. Sometimes I have visitors. Diane stops by for tea and brings muffins. My neighbor, Mrs. Ora, lends me extra folding chairs. We talk about movies, about courage, and about how age is never an excuse for resignation. The sounds of my life have returned, not loud, not rushed, but entirely my own. One afternoon, I found myself softly humming an old school song in the kitchen, not on purpose, just out of habit. That's when I realized I'm not running away. I'm saving myself. Running away means leaving in fear and chaos. But me, I left with a plan, with reason, with order. I left behind a clean house, separated bills, clear deadlines, and transparent documents. I didn't leave a mess. I left consequences. And contrary to what many might think, what drove me wasn't courage. It was exhaustion. The difference was that, this time, exhaustion turned into action. 2 days later, Diane came back from the market with a bag of red plums and some news. I ran into Mrs. Gloria, your old neighbor. She said last Sunday, the boys' barbecue was a disaster. Guests came and left early, the smoke barely had time to rise. Eric stood in the middle of the room, lost, like a stranger. I stayed quiet, rinsing rice. Diane understood. She didn't push. Then she said softly, "Seems like that house misses you more than he thought it would." I sat down, wiped my hands with a kitchen towel, and looked toward the balcony. The little basil plant I'd been given had taken root, growing green and strong without much care. I wanted to say, "So have I." That night, I slept fine, but I dreamed. In my dream, I walked through the living room of the old house. No one saw me. People were talking quietly, awkwardly. The light was dim, the table smaller, the tablecloth wrinkled. No one smiled. I woke to the sound of rain hitting the roof of my apartment. I made a cup of coffee and sat watching the drops slide down the window pane. And that's when I understood. My absence has become a presence, and it's doing what my silence never could. That weekend, Tina called. Aunt Lori, his lawyer, just texted. His tone was awkward, trying to sound polite. He said he never thought his mom would actually go through with it. He wants to know if things can be canceled amicably. I asked, without sarcasm. Cancel what? Tina laughed. I guess he finally realized you weren't bluffing, you meant it. I thanked Tina and told her to keep everything strictly in writing. No phone calls, no family meetings. Because after all, if 7 years of living together hadn't been enough for him to talk to his mother like an adult, then one late conversation wouldn't change anything. The following week, I had an unexpected visitor, Carol, one of Eric's friends. She rode up on her bike, her face a mix of guilt and concern. "I'm sorry for showing up unannounced. I hope I'm not bothering you." Not at all. Come in, sit for a bit. I pulled a chair for her in my small backyard, beside the violet flowers I'd recently planted. Carol sat quietly for a while, then looked around and said, I didn't go to the party, but I heard about it. I just wanted to see how you were doing. I nodded gently. I'm fine now, Carol. More peaceful than I've ever been. She looked at me and said softly, You did the right thing. Most mothers would have let it go, then baked cookies the next day like nothing happened. I smiled. I've baked enough cookies like that, Carol. That's enough. The young woman smiled back, not with pity, but with respect. Before leaving, she handed me a small bag of cornbread. I made it last night, my grandma's recipe. After she left, I sat quietly. I thought about how some visits are life's way of giving back a little justice, not from those who hurt us, but from those who still know how to care. By the next Friday, I noticed something. No more messages, no calls, no word through anyone else. Maybe he was drowning in the silence of realization, or perhaps in pride that didn't know how to bow. But I wasn't waiting for a reply. I was waiting for my life to continue, and it finally was. I got accepted into a book club at the Portland Community Cultural Center, a small group of older women. We read passages together, and sometimes shared the wounds hiding between the lines. During the first meeting, I read a passage aloud. Anyone who cannot endure the silence they themselves created will never learn to cherish the presence they have lost. The room went quiet for a few seconds. Then, a silver-haired woman sitting to my left softly said, Sounds like it was written by a mother.
Hey,
I smiled, but didn't reply.
hey.
A few days later, I heard from an acquaintance that Eric was looking for a new place to live. Maybe it was too late, but at last he was beginning to learn what I had understood long ago. Peace isn't something you beg for. It's something you create. Now the next steps were his, while the burden had returned to where it truly belonged. That barbecue he'd once bragged about had become the neighbors' running joke. They called it the party of absence. Not because it lacked food, but because it lacked a soul. And little by little, the world around him began to notice. When the one who holds everything together is gone, the party ends and the house collapses with it. Meanwhile, in my new apartment, tidy, bright, with sunny windows and clean laundry lines, nothing was missing. No shortage of bread, no shortage of music, and most importantly, no shortage of me. Not long after that party of silence, one image kept replaying in my mind. The old TV remote at the house. The battery cover was held together with tape, yet it still worked. I was the one who replaced the batteries every time they ran out. No one ever noticed. No one ever said thank you. Everything in that house was just like that. A week later, after Carol's visit, I received a handwritten envelope in the mail. Inside was a folded piece of paper with a few uneven lines. I'm trying to understand what's going on. It feels like you let everything go too fast. I know I'm not perfect, but could you talk to me like a mother again? I read it once, folded it, and placed it in the bottom drawer. Not out of affection, but acknowledgement. It wasn't really a letter. It was a clumsy confession from a man who'd never had the courage to look at himself. In his mind, he was still a 32-year-old boy waiting for his mother to soothe him. But time doesn't pause for those who stand still, and he remained trapped inside his own excuses. Weeks later, I heard he'd sold his gaming console and tried to borrow money from 2 coworkers. One refused, saying, "After what happened with your mom, everyone feels awkward around you." Bit by bit, life was returning to him the true reflection he'd avoided for so long. Then my sister Margaret came to visit. She wanted to see if what she'd heard was true. She said Eric had called her, asking for help, paying off some debts, talking as if he were the victim. She asked me, "Lori, is he really living alone now? Did you actually move out?" I nodded. Yes, I did. The house still has my name on it, but my affection doesn't. That left me a long time ago. She looked at me for a moment, then said quietly, I always thought you were the kind of person who endures until the very end. I smiled faintly. I did endure, Margaret. And the end was the moment I left. We sat in silence for a while. Then she sighed. Truth is, he's never really had to grow up, has he? You've always cleaned up before he could fall. I looked out toward the garden and said softly, I just wanted to spare him pain, but some people only learn once they've felt it themselves. At the next book club meeting, I shared a quote from my favorite notebook. Adulthood isn't about paying bills. It's about knowing where others end and where you begin. Several of the older women smiled. One named Zenaid said, My grandson's 38 and still asks me where his shoes are. Maybe we taught our kids how to care, but we also taught them how to depend. I carried her words with me the whole way home. And then, something unexpected happened. Right outside the gate of my little Portland apartment complex, a plastic bag had been left waiting. Inside were 3 containers of food and a note. I made rice, beans, and beef. No salt. The way you like it. I didn't bring it inside. I just left it by the laundry corner, next to the old dryer. I looked at it for a long time, and finally understood. This is the gesture of someone entering the first stage of remorse, the stage where a person only wants to reclaim comfort, not truly make things right. That night, I cooked my own meal, sautéed squash, soft boiled eggs, and a slice of toasted bread. After eating, I threw away those 3 plastic containers. Food shouldn't carry a burden, and inside them, all I saw was guilt wrapped in plastic. I began to wonder, what made my son incapable of growing up? It wasn't a lack of upbringing. Eric had a proper education, a roof over his head, a clean bed, new notebooks every year, advice, even discipline when necessary. But he had a safety net that was far too thick. Every time he fell, I was there before he could even feel the pain. I used to think that was love. Now I know in part, it was fear. Fear he'd get hurt. Fear life would swallow him whole. Fear he'd become like his father. Robert, a good man, but weak, unable to hold himself up. Over the years, my care became armor, and Eric learned that inside it, nothing could hurt him until the day I stopped. I began writing about everything in a small journal, short, simple entries. I called them Notes for Mothers Who Don't Want to Disappear. I wrote every night. And one evening, I wrote, It's not that he didn't grow. It's that I never gave him room to grow. Every time he fell, I was there, ladder in hand. I closed the notebook and slept peacefully for the first time without guilt. The next morning, I went downtown. I stopped at a small stationery shop near Belmont Street, bought a new envelope and a sheet of paper with soft floral patterns. I wrote, I'm glad you know how to cook. I hope someday you'll also learn how to choose wisely. This will be the last time I speak about this. From now on, life itself will be your teacher. I signed my name but didn't write Mom. Not out of coldness, but because it was the end. After that letter, there were no more containers, no more notes. For 2 full weeks, only one message came. I read it. I think I understand. Maybe. No explanations, no honest questions. Just the usual attempt to wrap things up with an all right, as if this were just another phase, as if I'd eventually come back with my grocery basket and embroidered towel. But time moved on, and so did I. I started attending a light exercise class at the community center, making friends with 2 women, Selena and Mari. One told me she'd been through something similar with her grandson, but never had the courage to leave. The other once kicked her son out of the house with her husband's support, but still carried guilt in her heart. I didn't. During the third class, while we were stretching, Selena looked at me and said, "You have the eyes of someone who's locked the door and thrown away the key." I smiled. I didn't throw it away. I just hung it somewhere no one can reach. Meanwhile, Tina, my niece, kept me updated. The legal deadline for him to vacate the house is coming up. So far, there's been no action from his side. I simply nodded and smiled. Because at last, life had turned itself in the right direction. And I, after 65 years of living for others, was finally, truly free. He didn't ask for an extension, didn't file an appeal, just stayed silent. But it wasn't the silence of an adult. It was, as Tina said, the silence of someone waiting for me to give up. I replied to her calmly, with the steadiness I'd learned after so many years of fear. He didn't expect me to follow through. Truly didn't. All his life, he only believed in my fears. Fear of cutting ties. Fear of leaving. Fear of being alone. Eric always thought that disappearing for a few days and coming back with a smile would make everything fine again. But what he didn't know, or refused to see, was that my decision didn't come from anger. It came from sleepless nights, stacked bills, and words swallowed too many times. On the 28th day after sending the notice, I got a message. "Can we talk? I just want to see you, not discuss any papers." I didn't reply. Not out of pride, but because I had finally learned the difference between wanting to talk and wanting to persuade. That weekend, Mr. Robert, the landlord of my Portland apartment, stopped by. He brought the renewal contract and smiled. "I've never had a tenant as neat and punctual as you. If you'd like to stay longer, just say so." I signed right then for another 6 months. And in that moment, I knew there was no road back. On Monday morning, I went to Anna's salon, my old hairdresser for 10 years. I cut my hair short, lighter, freer. When I looked in the mirror, I almost didn't recognize myself. Not because I had changed too much, but because, for the first time in years, I saw someone real. Someone who no longer waited for anyone to walk in and fix her life. Someone who chose instead of merely accepting. The next day, I stopped by the nearby payment center to pay my utility bills, then on a whim bought a scratch-off lottery ticket. I won $10. I laughed to myself right there in the convenience store. A small sum, but it felt big, as if luck had finally turned its face toward me. That afternoon, another message appeared. "What should I do with your stuff that's still here?" The way he asked made it clear he knew the time was running out, that I wouldn't be coming back to clean up one last time. I texted back briefly. "Put it all in one box. Tina will handle it. No need to meet." No reply came. A former neighbor later told me. He'd started clearing things out bit by bit. A mattress left on the curb. A few bags of clothes tossed in the trash. The front gate left open longer than usual. On the 42nd day, still within the deadline, Tina called. "Aunt Lori, he dropped off the keys at the office and told me to let you know." Told or asked? Just told. Good. It's time. I hung up, my heart light as if I'd just settled an old debt. One not listed on any statement, but one that had cost far more than money. The following week, Tina and I went to the old house. She brought a locksmith to change the locks. The place was empty, dusty, faintly damp, but there was no anger, no sadness, just space. I opened every window and let the Oregon wind pour in. I walked slowly through each room, rested my hand on the kitchen wall, looked up at the living room ceiling, and lightly touched the doorway where he once wrote his name in chalk. I took a deep breath and whispered, "It's all right now." I didn't stay too long. The house was no longer a home, just a structure needing repair before a decision. I locked the door with the new key and walked away, steady and sure. On the way back, I stopped by a used bookstore on Morrison Street and bought a red-covered book titled "Those Who Leave and Don't Look Back. It wasn't a tragic novel. It was a book about people who chose decisively, about how the world readjusts itself once we stop waiting for it to change. I finished it in 3 days and underlined one sentence. We don't always need to be forgiven. Sometimes, we just need to be forgotten by those who once believed they had the right to keep us. I closed the book, set it on my nightstand, and went to bed early. It was a Thursday night when I realized, my name finally fits me, Lori, the woman who now truly belongs to herself. I wrote Lori on my new Portland Public Library registration form and smiled, without even noticing, like someone who had just found her real signature again after years of only signing for others. Lori Bennett, whole, complete, me. It had been more than a week since Tina told me that Eric had returned the keys. Since then, everything had fallen back into place. No drama, no hesitation, no turning back. He didn't come back. And I didn't leave a single crack open for doubt. That house was now just an object, not a home. I began waking up early, without an alarm. My body and soul had finally made peace after years of conflict. No more sleepless nights from fear. No more holding my breath, wondering what might happen today. The only sounds left were the neighbor's old radio and my own footsteps on the cool wooden floor. I wore brighter clothes not for fashion, but because they matched the calm I felt inside. One morning, when I opened my closet, I realized half my old clothes no longer spoke to me. Gray outfits, worn-out blouses, long skirts meant to hide, washed-out coats. I packed them all and brought them to the donation center near St. James Church. That afternoon, I stopped by a small mall at Belmont and 32nd Avenue, bought 2 new blouses, one pale pink, one turquoise, and a pair of earrings with green stones. As I walked out, the young clerk smiled at me. "You have the glow of someone starting over." I replied, "Not starting over, just returning to myself." My afternoons now had their own rhythm. Monday, reading at Laurelhurst Park. Wednesday, creative writing class at the community center. Friday, coffee with Mrs. Marissa, my neighbor across the street. On the other days, I walked to the farthest bakery in the neighborhood, just to stretch my legs and sip coffee from a glass cup that warmed my hands. My body loved me again, so did my mind. New notebook, not about the past, not about the old house, only about what came after. I titled it, Continue. And on one page, I wrote, "Freedom isn't loud. It simply removes what's unnecessary, and what remains is you." That same month, I received a phone call from Joanne, a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in over 10 years. She had heard about my story through someone we both knew and called. Her voice hesitant. "Lori, I admire you so much. I've never had that kind of strength." We talked for nearly an hour. She told me about a marriage that ended too late, about her daughter who now treated her exactly the way she once endured, giving endlessly, yet never being appreciated. At the end of the call, Joanne said, and I thought, maybe the most valuable thing we leave behind in life isn't what we build, but the space we create, the space that allows others to be free from the burdens we've finally put down. That same week, Tina texted me, "All the paperwork for the house is done. The rental listing is up. Everything's under control." I read it, smiled, and wrote in my notebook, "Everything's under control, including me." I went to the kitchen, brewed a cup of chamomile tea, cut a small slice of lemon cake, and sat on the porch. The jasmine in the pot was blooming, its fragrance floating lightly through the window, a scent that only appears when you stop long enough to notice. And in that moment, I understood. My new life has no climax, no drama, no twists, only steadiness. And that steadiness, that's the peace I'd never known before. A few days later, I received an invitation to speak at a discussion event at the Portland Community Center. The topic: family boundaries and emotional independence. I accepted, on one condition: no names, no blame, just the path. The path of a woman named Lori, who finally learned how to stand in her own light. My speech began with these words: being a mother doesn't mean being endlessly available. It means staying whole and knowing when to step back once your presence becomes invisible. On the day of the talk, I sat on a simple wooden chair in the community center room, facing 10 women of different ages. Some had tears in their eyes, others took notes. When I finished, someone raised her hand. "What if one day your son wants to come back?" I took a deep breath, looked her straight in the eyes, and said, "Then let him return to himself, because I no longer live in the place where he left me." The room was silent for a few seconds. Then small, warm applause followed. I went home with a bag of bread, given by one of the women. On the bag was a note: "Thank you for saying what I still don't have the courage to live." I slipped that note into my notebook. That night, I slept with the window open. The night breeze carried the scent of jasmine from my balcony, and in the dark, I thought, what remains with me isn't little, it's everything. The next morning, when I received the new keys from the real estate office, I didn't cry. I just traced the metal edge gently, as if recognizing the familiar shape of something that had always been mine, but had been in the wrong hands for too long. The key came in a simple white envelope, along with the lease contract for the new tenants, a young couple named Daniel and Sarah Miller. No kids, no pets, kind eyes, calm voices. They were the kind of people who understood that a house isn't just walls and a roof, it's presence. I read every clause carefully, then signed, Lori Bennett. The pen stroke was steady, no shaking, no hesitation, no corrections. I sealed the envelope, leaned back in my chair, and felt peace. It was done. The old house no longer owned me. It was simply an asset, exactly as it should be. Outside, Mrs. Marissa, my neighbor across the street, was sweeping leaves. She called out over the fence, "Did you know there's a neighborhood meeting tomorrow?" I opened my yellow-covered notebook, where I had deliberately left the last page blank, and wrote, "When I left that house, I also left behind a version of myself, the one who confused love with sacrifice. Today, my name belongs exactly to where I stand." I closed the notebook and looked around my small apartment. The bookshelf, the jasmine plant, the wooden table from the flea market, the floral rug that reminded me of childhood, the mismatched but spotless dishes, and the brown leather handbag, a gift I bought for myself when I received my first pension check. The doorbell rang. It was Selena, my friend from the creative writing class. "I'm returning your book, and I have something to invite you to." She stepped in, as naturally as family. "We're organizing a poetry reading next month. Everyone will share their own piece. You have to read that passage about the door and the key." I laughed. "All right, I'll think about it." We talked for over an hour about books, about people, about vegetable prices at the market. Before she left, she paused at the door, looked around, and said softly, "This place truly feels like a home." I smiled. Yes, because now it's just me, and that's enough. After she left, I washed the dishes with warm water, leaving the window open. The afternoon light drifted into the kitchen, gentle as an old friend finding their way back. I sat down on the sofa and closed my eyes for a few minutes. I didn't think about regret, or reconciliation, or Eric, or the years behind me. I only thought about what was coming: the meal I'd cook tomorrow, the nail polish color I'd try this weekend, the visit to Joanne I was planning, the new lavender plant I wanted for the balcony, and the quiet feeling that my life finally fit within itself. The house where he once lived, the one I tried to hold together through silence, no longer exists. Now there is another home smaller, simpler, but truer, and the name on the door bears only one name: Lori Bennett. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Your words might brighten someone's day, just as a gentle light once brightened mine. Lori's story is a fictional tale inspired by true experiences. Names and locations have been changed, but the emotions, loneliness, pain, and the decision to rise and reclaim one's worth are real for many. How many times in life have we chosen silence to keep the peace, only to realize we've lost our own voice? And how many times has a single gentle word of truth been the first step toward freedom? Perhaps God never meant for us to live in fear, but in the light of truth and kindness. When we learn to love ourselves rightly, He blesses that journey late or not, it will still be complete. Thank you for listening to today's story. Stay until the end of the video, where two of the most beloved stories await, and I believe you'll find a piece of yourself in them.